to go ahead and vote. And one of the elections that people expect to happen is that of Anambra Central Senatorial elections, which hasn't happened. But we understand, yes, there's been several legal cases, but at the moment that election hasn't held. What do you think is the key challenge why that is the case? There's
no challenge. It's a very funny situation. There's absolutely no challenge. Legally, morally, jurisprudentially, in whatever ramification or dimension you want to think about it, there is no challenge whatsoever. Section 87, subsection 10 of the Electoral Act as amended clearly states that no court process or court proceedings or court order can stop the holding of any general election. And the Supreme Court in the Labour Party and INEC case, which is the locus classicus on fresh elections, has clearly held that any court-ordered election is a general election. And therefore, if it is a general election, the law says that nothing can stop it from being held. So it is surprising that INEC has not held that election. In all of the 109 senatorial districts, Anambra Central remains the only senatorial district that has no representation in the Senate.
You said INEC hasn't held that election.
Yes.
But of course, we should expect that INEC is aware and perhaps will act within a couple of time. I think sometimes within the next less than 6 months, Anambra should be going through its elections.
That is for the governorship elections. We are talking about the senatorial, Anambra Central Senatorial elections that ought to have been held since the declaration of the disqualification of Uche Ekwunife by the Court of Appeal. And to think that the same PDP that the Court of Appeal declared as having no candidate went back to the Court of Appeal for interpretation of the same judgment, and the Court of Appeal dismissed their request. They went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also refused and dismissed their request based on lack of jurisdiction. You would want to wonder what exactly are you saying? Are they really wanting to wait for the governorship election to come first before they give the right of people, the franchise right of the people to the people? People need to be represented, and this situation is due to no fault of theirs. You see what happened in Rivers State, how long it took for INEC to have conducted elections there, and the kind of pressures INEC went through before they succumbed to.
But at that time, wasn't their reason valid? Because INEC at that time said, well, look, we have security challenges and we can't afford to risk.
Sorry, I can't. There cannot be any valid reason not to hold elections. The law says even if INEC shall hold elections. It said shall. It does not leave it to their discretion. If there's no discretion in holding an election, you must hold an election. It's a mandatory word.
Yes, it is, but we all know that if security is a key challenge, you can't go ahead with if it's obvious.
Are you saying that security in Rivers State will be a challenge more than it was in Borno State?
I was just highlighting the reasons they gave in Rivers before the elections held.
That was,
but it's different now.
Thankfully, I was in this studio and I trashed that argument of security.
Okay. Because, but now that this one about Anambra Central Senatorial elections, there are a lot of things here. We've seen several court cases.
Yes.
You talked about right from when the PDP candidate was disqualified. She went to court up until the Supreme Court. After the Court of Appeal, that case was sorted. But we also now saw that I think the APC also went to court. The court had decided on that case. What if INEC then says, well, at the moment, if the PDP has gone to court, taken INEC to court, saying our candidate, in fact, I think there was a Justice Chikere judgment,
yes,
which
who
said that
funnily enough has given two conflicting judgments.
Which said that one of the judgments said the PDP candidate must participate in that election.
Yes.
So what if INEC says, look, we're waiting to sort that part out before we conduct elections because it's been appealed?
The law is clear. The law is clear. First, the case of Labour Party and INEC clearly states that fresh elections exclude fresh nominations. That is one. The same Anguli Chikere, in the case of Sharon Ikeazo and APC against INEC, held, and it is this year, March 2017, that the law is settled that fresh candidates are not permitted in court-ordered fresh elections. And in that case that you are referring to, she merely made an injunction. And that injunction is an injunction of illegality. That is to say that when you are faced with two judgments of the court, you do not cherry pick. You obviously have to do one of two things. You obey the one that is later in time, or you obey the one that has superior jurisdiction. And the one that has superior jurisdiction is the one of them that there should be no substitution. That means there should be no new candidate for a fresh election. And the law is very clear. INEC has a strong platform, a strong foundation of law to stand on, to hold the election, and let whatever court processes are going on to continue.
So
Section 87
you expect
of the
that
Electoral
INEC,
Act.
You expect that INEC now should conduct that election?
Absolutely.
Despite security concerns that have been raised?
There are no security concerns in Anambra State. There are no security. In fact, there are no legal concerns. Because as far as the law is concerned, Section 87, subsection 10, we must emphasize that section of the Electoral Act clearly says that no court order or court process or court decision can stop the holding of a general election.
So does that mean that the February 2016 judgment of Justice Chike March?
Yes.
Okay, but there was one of February.
Okay.
February 2000, March, there's March 2017.
2017, yes.
There's February 2016.
Yes.
So does that then mean that the one for February 2016 between the PDP and INEC, is that meant to be a fresh candidate when she ruled that the PDP must have a candidate?
That's what it means. Because the only candidate that contested the election was Uche Kunife. And she's the only person entitled to be part of the fresh election. But she decamped to APC, we all know that. So PDP had no candidate. In point of fact, the court of appeal had even declared that PDP was disqualified. So at the time of the fresh election, there ought not to be any consideration at all given to any candidate from PDP. Let me give you this analogy. You are running a 100-meter race, and 5 people are on the set waiting for the whistle. At the point where you blow the whistle for them to go, there is a false start. When there's a false start, you call them back to the starting blocks, wouldn't you? Now, would you now say that you have to now go back to the screening and get fresh people to join in the race? That is what INEC appears to be wanting to do. Changing the goalpost in the middle and putting the law, turning the law on its head and expecting it to work. The law cannot work that way.
But to what extent can we blame INEC? If one judgment of is in March of 2017 says, well, the candidates, the time for nomination and withdrawal or substitution of candidate is over, that can happen. And then if there's another judgment in 2016 which says the PDP candidates or the PDP must have a candidate in that election, what does INEC do in that case?
INEC should first follow the provision of the law, which is Section 87, subsection 10, that says no court order. Assuming without considering that there is a valid court order. Section 87, subsection 10 says no court order shall stop the holding of a general election. It's a clear wording. When words are used clearly and are unambiguous in a law, you interpret them very unambiguously. And that is what INEC ought to have done. Secondly, the same judge, Justice Anambra Chikere, in March 2017, now held again that nobody who did not participate in the original election is entitled to participate in the court-declared fresh election. So, and this is a judgment later in time in the same Anambra Central Senatorial District case.
What does that judgment mean? If it says the candidates of the APC, I think that judgment was between Sharon Kazo, APC, and INEC.
Yes.
Does that then mean that since she can't participate, the candidate of the APC in that case happens to be Senator Ngige,
who had written for his withdrawal, who had withdrawn?
The difference between this election, because all of these judgments, for those who think, well, this might be a little confusing, is this any different than what we saw in Kogi, for instance?
To an extent, what we saw in Kogi when Abdul Abubakar died was a continuation of an election. APC was allowed to replace the candidate. So INEC interpreted it, and the Supreme Court also agreed with the interpretation of INEC that election was continuous, that election didn't stop. There was no court order of a fresh election, and there was no by-election. If there was a by-election, other parties would have been given the opportunity to have nominated fresh candidates. But in this case, what we have is a general election.
Okay, I'm just looking at this because if you say what we have is a general election, because there are some of those court judgments when they were talking about whether or not it's a general election, is it a by-election, is it a fresh election. So will INEC be wrong to say, look, we have to wait until all of these cases are exhausted in the courts, we have no encumbrance before we proceed with elections?
No, INEC would be absolutely wrong. And I quote section 87, subsection 10 of the Electoral Act, which says nothing in this section, and that's talking about nomination of candidates, presentation of candidates for election, shall empower the courts to stop the holding of primaries or general election or the processes thereof under this act pending the determination of a suit. It is clear.
So does it then mean that if you say that no court has got the powers to stop a general election,
yes,
what kind of elections are we looking at in Anambra Central?
Beautiful question. The election we are looking at in this Anambra Central Senatorial election is a general election, and I have the authority to back it. Labour Party and INEC, the Supreme Court clearly stated that a by-election is different from a general election, and that a by-election is where there is a vacancy, either by way of impeachment, by way of death, or by way of resignation. That makes that position vacant, and so candidates can come up afresh. But a general election is an election where everybody is allowed to start off afresh, and a court-ordered election is a continuation, more or less like a refreshment of the general election, not a refreshment of the by-election. And so the court clearly stated that every court-ordered election is a general election. Clearly stated, and if you permit me, I have it here, the law report of the Supreme Court, 2009 1-2 Supreme Court law reports, part 3, page 48, where the Supreme Court where the Supreme Court held that the Court of Appeal did not order a by-election, which by the said decision hearing reproduced is an election specially held to fill a vacant position. There was no vacant position to be filled. No one died and no one was removed as governor by an impeachment. So the Court of Appeal was right. The Supreme Court was upholding the decision of the Court of Appeal that what is being held in the Anambra Central Senatorial election is a general election that the section 87 subsection 10 applies to. So the Supreme Court is upholding the decision of the Court of Appeal by this.
So if I understand what you're saying, yes, in conclusion, is that INEC is right to have heeded the court judgment of, I think, between the PDP and INEC by rejecting a fresh candidate from the PDP.
INEC was right, absolutely right.
But you say that they are wrong,
yes,
by not going ahead with the election.
Brilliant.
In the light of the fact that some cases are still,
brilliant,
one or two,
brilliant,
still pending.
Brilliant. They are right in rejecting candidates that were not part of the original general election. But they are wrong in stopping to hold or refraining from holding or not holding that election